I'm an artist from Portugal based in Munich. So these long projects start mostly from an idea and a strong concept that develops throughout my environment. So I look around me and there's often something that I don't understand or something that I think it's somehow unfair. And I started to research on these issues, and somehow through that research of what happens around me, a theme starts to arise in a concept that normally keeps me busy for a time of 2-3 years. And then I developed different, not only conceptual works and research, but also sculptures and videos around such themes. I think the wish of working in mythology started by looking where Western knowledge hasn't still arrived. So looking at spaces that we still don't know and we still don't grasp this kind of scientific knowledge about. And looking at these spaces that are still unknown as spaces where mythologies can happen, like contemporary belief structures could appear. And I've been worked before in these unknown territories in an online manner, in thinking about post-truth and alternative facts. I look into dark matter in physics as that space of unknown. And for the last years, I've been looking into the depths of the ocean, the deep sea, as a space that is so alien for us humans. And of course, that departed from my very big connection in specific with the Atlantic Ocean. So as Portuguese growing up next to the sea, I have this very, I have a duality in the relationship with the ocean of something that gives me so much joy, but at the same time can take my life. And yet again, growing up, looking at the horizon from the Lisbon docks with a very dual feeling, you know, of understanding that my ancestors have crossed this horizon, what could look like as a bravery act, but at the same time that cross has brought colonialism and a lot of the injustice and a lot of the structures that are still there today in our world derive from that path. So I really wanted to work on the ocean on my recent work. So I'm very curious of how does things start to exist, let's say, like how does knowledge, so it's the epistemological question, you know, when does things become real and objectively real? And if you think of the scientific knowledge, I believe it works in the same belief structures as many other, you know, beliefs and religions. So I was starting to be very curious of like what it is about the scientific knowledge that makes it so different, you know, than other knowledges. And that is in fact very speculative, you know, a lot of what science or scientific method produces. And as an artist, I believe that I can also speculate about possible futures, about possible pasts as well. And I think that's a very interesting realm these days to create a certain narrative that could engage people when they look at my work. This idea came, or it's very informed by a known Afrofuturistic myth of Drexciya. Not only, but also. So Drexciya is this band from Detroit who was active mostly in the 90s, and they created a myth around the underwater civilization that is descendant from the enslaved people who were crossed over the ocean. So there is this very traumatic act, or very violent act that was done by the traders who would throw off the boat pregnant women when they started labor. And Drexciya believed, or like created this myth that these babies who were born under the water never needed to breathe oxygen. They could like get oxygen on the water, and they created this civilization that is somehow much more developed than humans, and that do the strange music that they do, and that somehow would reconquer the earth or the land. And I thought this mythology has been worked already many times before, but it became kind of a thought structure that I used throughout this project. and I was looking at the time around or to the specific space of the Azorian archipelago, which is right in the rift, in the Atlantic rift. That is also a place that we believe it's the origin of life, so close to the Azores archipelago. It's where, again, scientists believe that the first life form on Earth emerged. And the Azorian archipelago is also where there was a thought of starting deep sea mining in Portugal. So there was a prospect that it's now stopped for a question of time, maybe, of trying to extract certain metals, precious metals, from the depths of the ocean. I was then thinking of a possible encounter of us humans with these other species while we try to extract these metals from the deep sea.
Though I'm not so sure if it's relevant for the reports.
And then, you know, this certain science fiction narrative started to emerge in my head of conflict started, you know, between these human species and the underwater species. So then I thought of a series of films as a good way to work and to think about this idea. And at the same time, I was producing a lot of sculptures who kind of give a certain imaginary of these characters, and perhaps they also portrayed a bit these underwater species. So the first episode was filmed in continental Portugal. Most precisely, I was producing sculptures in the north coast of Portugal, and also filming in continental Europe. The second film was completely produced and filmed in the Azores archipelago in São Miguel Island. And, you know, given the theme and given that I'm talking about the trade of enslaved people, you know, going to the other side of the Atlantic to work on the memory of the Atlantic and of that time, it's for sure something that it really fascinates me, and I think it's going to be a great challenge, but I think it's going to be very relevant and important for the work, because a lot of the consequences of colonialism are of course visible in continental Europe, but they are incredibly visible as well in specific in Brazil. So I don't have so many plans, but my idea is to bring this emergence of this civilization by the coast of Brazil, and using that, again, this conflict between the human species and this underwater world as not as an excuse, but as a medium to work on the colonial history of Portugal and on the colonial, on the history of Brazil, you know, and especially on the things that are still visible there today. Thinking of the African descendants people in Brazil, and thinking of how to create a certain memory, you know, and how do people relate to the ocean or relate to the memory of the Atlantic, looking it from the other hemisphere, looking it from the other side of the Atlantic. Yeah. So the deep sea mining was something that kind of even sparked a bit the project, you know. I think it's a very bizarre idea that humans are having to extract minerals from a place we know so little about. And at the same time, what we know about this ecosystem of the deep sea is that it hasn't been changed for, you know, millions of years, you know. And also that this exploitation of minerals of the deep sea is being backed by the so-called green technology. So in a way, there's this defense that to make our life more sustainable, you know, I mean our life, like our industrialized capitalist life, more sustainable, we have to, you know, still extract many minerals so we can have enough batteries to do kind of the green turn into the way that we live. And it's kind of ridiculous to think that you have to damage, you know, the most sensible part of the earth to do so. So I think the deep sea mining became a very interesting or a very complete and complex process that involves all these ideas. I was also thinking that the depths of the ocean, and the map of the depths of the ocean is being divided in straight lines as well throughout countries, or either countries that have already ocean, they call it exclusive economic zone. But I believe also other countries are kind of grabbing their hands in certain pieces of ocean. And there is such an incredible similarity to the way that colonialism was working, of dividing territories into straight lines and exploiting, again, natural resources from these territories without thinking of any life species that might be there. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a very interesting, interesting and ugly thing that humans are planning to do, that also allows me to speak about the colonial past, and trying to maybe change or inform the people about what is about to happen, in terms of natural extractions. So I've been actually following the work of Pivot for a very long time. So for sure I was very, I was very willing to apply. As I was speaking before, thinking of the way of how the project could cross the Atlantic, speaking also of the memory of the Atlantic. There was something that really attracted me to apply and to spend some time in São Paulo. And again, I think as a Portuguese, who is trying to engage in the memorial of the colonial crimes, I feel it's such an important step to go to the other side of the Atlantic and understand how, what was the consequence of such crimes, or let's say, like, what are the still visible consequences of such injustice, in nowadays.